Hello, my class. I miss you. I wish I was there with you. Currently, if all is going well, I am at the closing on my house, signing lots and lots of papers and wishing I was with you guys. A little lesson today. We're going to be talking about story structure. So we're taking a little break from what we were working on to move into some short stories. Today, this awesome sub that you have with you, depending on what side of the room she's on, I'm not sure, or he, is going to be handing out one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, one of my favorite authors. So we're going to study one of his stories. He's a very logical, creative writer. So we got to talk about story structure today, okay? And you're going to be taking some notes. So make sure you have out a blank sheet of paper and a pen or pencil that will not fail you, okay? And I will try to go through this relatively slowly, but knowing that it's a video and I can't really tell where you're at. Try to pay attention and keep up. Okay, so you're going to want to draw one of these. Hopefully you've seen them before. Can you see it? Okay. It's a lovely, it looks like a little bit crazy traffic cone here, okay? You're going to have a little line that's going to go all the way up into that traffic cone and then almost straight down and then another little line, okay? So get your little traffic cone drawn on there. It's also hard recording this because all my movements are backwards from what I'm seeing on there, so have patience with me, okay? And then the major things you're going to want to label on this beautiful lopsided traffic cone that you've got, okay? The first thing is exposition. That's down here on the left. Exposition, E-X-P-O-S-I-T-I-O-N, exposition, okay? And then leave yourself plenty of space because you're going to take notes on each of these categories as well. I just put the main categories in here for the purpose of display on this lovely screen. So rising action is next. Then all the way at the top, see, I got a little excited and I almost misspelled it. Climax right here at the very top. Then about halfway down, you're going to want falling action. And then way down at the bottom is resolution. Okay, resolution. So let's talk about these different categories, starting over here with exposition. Okay, when you're in any type of narrative, any type of story, you're going to always see it start with exposition. Okay, this is all of the background information you need to know to make this story make sense. For example, it will explain the place. It will explain the time. It will give you all of the characters involved. It'll oftentimes introduce the villain directly. Sometimes the villain is introduced indirectly through hints at what is coming. And with something to remember from our Magician's Nephew unit, the 3 types of conflict, depending on which type of conflict is in here, you're going to see some different types of villains. So just to review those, we've got man versus man versus himself, and man versus a power greater than himself, okay? And that includes nature, it includes God, it includes the supernatural, it includes government. Any of those things qualify as man versus a power greater than himself, okay? So that villain will be hinted at in this exposition part, okay? And then right here, where we're about to take off, this is where the action starts to take off, okay? This is usually where you're introduced to what that conflict is going to be, okay? And then it takes off into the rising action. Then moving into rising action, okay, this is going to be the bulk of your story. I even tell my creative writing students, Act 2 is always the bulk of your story, okay, because you're taking that original conflict, whether it's man versus himself, or man versus a power greater than himself, or some combination in there, and you're making it build in tension. You're making it more and more tense as you go through the chapters, okay, and you're adding layers to the story. Okay, so sometimes with this rising action, you'll have things like, they're called barriers, okay, where your protagonist will try something to obtain his or her goal or to solve the conflict, and it's like they hit a wall like that, okay? It's a literal barrier. They cannot do it. It does not work. If you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings story, when Frodo wants to take the ring to Middle-earth, one of the first ways that they try to get past the mountains is to go over the mountain. and they hit a barrier. The weather becomes absolutely insane, magically so, we learn later, and it's almost freezing the hobbits to death. So they have to actually, they physically stop and have to turn around and try something else. So that's an example of a barrier. The main character tries something, it doesn't work. Other things that you can see in the rising action are situations. They're like mini stories within the bigger story. So if we stay with that Lord of the Rings metaphor, they hit that barrier in the mountains, then Frodo and his little company come back down, and they're like, well, if we can't go over the mountains, let's go under them. Okay, and they go into the mines of Moria, and there's a whole miniature story with its own beginning, middle, and end that takes place just in that scene underneath the mountains, and it's part of the bigger story. Okay. Third thing you'll see sometimes in stories are complications, where characters or plot twists will get added to make the conflict more complicated. And now the main character has to wrap his or her head around more information to try to solve this. Now, in this rising action area, you sometimes will see a combination of all three of those barriers, situations, and complications. But depending on the type of story that you have, and depending on how long that story is, sometimes you'll only see one or two of those things. Sometimes it's simply just one attempt building up to solve that problem if the story is short enough, and you only see the outcome at the climax, okay? But keep in mind, the basic definition of rising action is that tension is rising as they're trying to solve the problem or reach the goal that was established with the conflict in your exposition, okay? So then, once we get past the rising action, we get to the climax. You may ask yourself, Mrs. Dick, how do I know that this is the climax of the story? Because there's a lot of different points that are tense in this story, okay? The way that you know that you have reached the climax is it will be the highest point of tension. It will come towards the very end of the story, and it is when you will see the protagonist and the antagonist come face to face. They have to face off, okay? And their final conflict will be resolved shortly afterwards, okay? So if we think about the movie The Incredibles, my son is super into The Incredibles right now, so I've seen it a lot, okay? The Incredibles family is in the middle of downtown, and they're fighting that giant robot that's kind of representative of the villain syndrome. Yay, they defeat the robot. Everyone's like, the supers are back. It's great. And they're all like, this is awesome. And you remember Dash is in the car, and he's like, this is the best vacation ever. But we know the climax has not happened yet, because Mr. Incredible in particular, our protagonist, has not come really, truly, equally face-to-face with Syndrome yet. That does not happen until they reach their house and realize Syndrome has tried to take the baby Jack, okay? And he flies him out of the house, and we think, oh no, he's going to steal the baby, when Mr. Incredible uses his awesome strength and blows up Syndrome's plane with his car. And then the mom pitches in and saves the baby, and then that's when it's happening, when they first enter the house to see Syndrome stealing Jack. Okay, that's the climax, face to face. Okay, so protagonist and antagonist come face to face. That's how we know towards the end of the film or book or short story that it's the climax. Then you have this little part called the falling action. It's very quick. That's why the slope is straight down. If you tried to ski on that, you would die. So falling action really is basically comes down to who wins the climax. Okay, the climax is that highest point of tension. They're face to face. The falling action is who wins and how does it happen. Okay, how does Batman defeat the Joker? How does Mr. Incredible defeat Syndrome? How does Frodo finally fulfill his goal to take the ring to Mount Doom? How does that happen? That's the falling action. Very, very short. Go right down that slope. Okay. Once that falling action is completed and you know who has basically won the conflict, okay, and if we're happy when it's the protagonist, when it's the antagonist, it's called a tragedy. It's very sad, okay? Then you have your resolution. The resolution is simply the tying up of all the loose ends in the story. Sometimes it's an explanation because you've seen the climax, you've seen the falling action, but you're like, wait, how did it happen? Okay, and the resolution will explain that. Okay. Sometimes you have other subplots like little romances are tied up, or, and the Incredibles Dash gets to go to the sports thing and try running and try to get second place and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So the resolution is that tying up of the loose ends. Sometimes, if it's a short story, it'll simply be a sentence. Done. Your resolution is done. That's all you need. Okay. Other times, if you're in a novel, it's usually the last chapter. We'll wrap everything up. And if it's a good writer and they've done well, all the subplots will be tied up, and we feel as readers very content, very happy with that, because we're not left with any questions. If you watch this happen in a TV episode, a lot of times they'll leave something unresolved, especially at the end of a season, because they want you still questioning and they want something on which to build a whole nother story. Okay, so depending on your form of storytelling, you'll get a very complete resolution or an incomplete resolution. Okay, so part of your homework is going to be, as you read through the Sherlock Holmes story, to map it out in this structure. So you'll simply draw this exactly as it is here without any of your extra notes. You'll just have exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And you're going to fill in the story so that you can see how it fits. What's the exposition given? How does the tension build? Where does the antagonist and the protagonist come into play? And keep in mind, the protagonist is not always who you think it is. Keep that in mind. There's a little hint. That was for free. Okay? And then you'll write, how did he or she win or not win? And then what was the resolution? Okay? And then you have some follow-up questions that's kind of a response to it, because this is one of those stories that's very intriguing to read, but it's written by someone who does not have a biblical worldview. So thinking through what are his ideas on right and wrong and all of that wrapped into your response questions. So those will be on End Grade. Make sure that you log in, and I will see you guys when we return after Election Tuesday on November 10th. See you later.